The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Love news but find keeping up a bit overwhelming? Well, Newsable is the answer. It's your daily fix of everything worth talking about. I'm your host, Imogen Wells, and in about 15 minutes, I'll bring you what you need to know from Aotearoa and around the world and explain why it matters. Newsable tackles the big stuff without taking itself too seriously. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
When the Facts Change is brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in partnership with Kiwibank, the bank for Kiwi looking to get ahead in business and in life. A bank that delivers expertise and banking know-how, smart advice for business owners wanting to invest, grow their business or diversify. A bank that adapts with technology through the lens of its people and customers. It is a bank with heart that is driven by its purpose. Kiwi making Kiwi better off. Do you ever feel like you've been here before? Like it's Groundhog Day? Deja vu? Haven't we seen this story before? COVID is hitting us as we get into Christmas. Inflation is here. And central banks are increasing interest rates. Yep, that's how it felt almost a year ago today. But so much has happened. Almost a year ago today, I interviewed Jarrod Kerr, the chief economist of Kiwibank, about 2021, a year when inflation was starting to become a bit of a problem, where COVID had really roiled up our economy, and we were looking ahead to the next year of maybe some more settled weather economically. But of course, we know now that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. We had two supply shocks hitting the global economy. Supply shocks on energy, not just oil, but also gas. And secondly, labour, as COVID just kept on coming, wave after wave, taking people out of the workforce, keeping people at home, stopping them from going to work because they had to look after kids that couldn't go to school. All of those disruptions again and again through 2021. A year where we seemed to go nowhere, but so much happened. That's this week on When the Facts Change. Well, welcome to When the Facts Change, an annual tradition. We have Jarrod Kerr, who's the chief economist for Kiwibank. Jarrod, it's great to have you back again. Well, 2022, that escalated.
Yeah, did it ever? Wow. Thinking about what we spoke about this time last year, we were obviously concerned about inflation and rising interest rates, but inflation came in much higher than we thought, and interest rates are going much higher than we thought. So, you know, there's obviously a lot of demand out there globally that pushed things a little too far with central banks easing too much during COVID, and now we're mopping it all up, and that's the difficult part, and that's I think causing a lot of pain, and I think the outlook to next year, geez, it's difficult, but it looks pretty awkward.
Yeah, I mean, a year ago, we were talking about inflation and interest rates and how central banks were beginning to crank down on the brakes, if you like, and inflation probably would come off in the next year or two, and then it kept on going. At the United States, heading up towards 7-8%. We're at 7% or so, and since then, our own Reserve Bank has cranked on the interest rate hikes and is expecting to take the official cash rate to 5.5%. Just this last week of the year, we've seen the US Federal Reserve put up interest rates 50, the European Central Bank up 50, the Bank of England up 50. And financial markets asset values have really come off the boil, including in Aotearoa too, with the asset value that most New Zealanders who have assets think about the most, which is their house value. Tell us, how the housing market is travelling with all of this interest rate news, and maybe how much further we could see it go.
Yeah, I think you touched on it nicely. That really low or record low interest rates fueled a lot of assets, including housing, obviously. And now central banks are trying to reverse that. And we've seen a massive increase in interest rates globally over the year as they try and rein in asset markets and prices. So what we've seen in New Zealand, the housing market has gone from recording, extraordinary gains, very large increases in house prices, up until last year, and now the Reserve Bank has cranked on the interest rate hikes, and we've seen, interest rates, mortgage rates lift from, a little over 2% to, getting closer to 7% and above. So a huge increase. We've also seen some regulatory changes coming through, which, LVR restrictions, triple CFA, the removal of interest rate deductibility, all these things have weighed heavily on the housing market, and house prices have fallen. House prices are down around 12% from the peak, and they've got further to fall. The central bank wants house prices to fall further.
How much of a wealth effect do you think there has been this year? Because there seemed to be some sort of wealth effect when prices really jumped up in 2020 and early 2021. And, we're in new territory here. I don't think most people who are alive today have seen a fall of double-digit levels headed for 20% falls in nominal house prices before. And we do wonder how it's going to affect those people who own those assets. Are they feeling a wealth effect, and is it starting to flow through into the stats on retail sales and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't underestimate, I think, the impact of the housing cycle on household confidence. There is no doubt that when house prices were rising at very rapid rates, that we saw households consume more, and we saw in our spending data that we spent a lot more money on renovations to the home and furniture and everything to do with the home. We saw a lot of spending going into it as house prices surged. Now we're seeing the reverse. House prices are falling, and spending on renovations and around the home has dropped right off. I think we've done a lot of the spending we wanted to do around the home. But with house prices falling, people are less confident to invest in their house and do more. Heading into next year, as you say, house prices are likely to fall by around 20%, which is quite a big nominal fall, and that will play on confidence. And on top of that, on top of your asset, your largest asset generally declining in value, you've had a surge in interest expense. So you're having to deal with that, and you're dealing with high inflation, so high prices elsewhere eating away at your purchasing power. So there's, I guess, three things that are really impacting households, and we've seen consumption slow already, and I think we'll see household consumption contract next year. So that'll be, I think, the start of what will be a recession in New Zealand next year.
And we saw a tiny little sneak preview of that in the September quarter GDP figures, which showed a very slight fall in household consumption, and interesting, a fall in government consumption as well. It seems, though, that just as consumers are putting their wallets back in the pocket, we've got all these tourists arriving who we haven't seen for a couple of years. And is there a chance that, as one set of wallets go back in the pocket, a whole bunch of new wallets arrive through the airport and spend to the point where maybe there's an offset and the hit isn't quite so great?
Yeah, there's definitely an offset. And we've been, encouraged by the spike in visitor arrivals. As you say, we've seen a lot of tourists coming back in, which is great. The peak in the tourist season is now, so we've seen a lot of tourists coming down and spending their euros or their Australian dollars or US dollars down here, and that's fantastic. The tourism industry has obviously been in hibernation for the last couple of years and is awakening back up now. There are capacity issues. They're struggling to find workers, which means we might not be able to take full advantage as we once would have. But it's good news. It's very good news, and it will definitely offset some of the decline in household spending. But it won't stop, I think, the inevitable slowdown in our economy next year. It'll be a great offset. It'll be a great windfall. But spending throughout the economy, particularly from households, is set to decline, and that will be the largest driver, I think, of growth next year. And one of the big swings in our economy will be construction. We've seen a huge uplift in construction, particularly residential, but also commercial, which is great. Construction activity is very high. We're building a lot, we're doing a lot, but it won't last. With the fall in house prices, there'll be less construction in residential space, and I think we'll see commercial space coming off as well. So one of the big swings up will become a big swing down next year.
When the Facts Change is brought to you in partnership with Kiwibank to help you understand the issues affecting the economy. And that's what their team of experts is here to do too. Here's Kiwibank economist Sabrina Delgado on the current grim status of the global and local economy.
Globally, economic output and activity is slowing. Higher interest rates are weighing heavily on demand and crushing activity. It's not pretty, but it's what's needed to bring down inflation. Here in Aotearoa, the outlook is soft at best. Our impressive surge in net migration helps lift activity, but still the economy is weakening under the weight of the Reserve Bank and a softening global backdrop.
Visit kiwibank.co.nz to stay up to date with detailed economic analysis and forecasts from Sabrina and other Kiwibank experts. They take big issues from both here and overseas and make them relevant to Kiwi businesses.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
One of my favourite cartoons as a kid was Wile E. Coyote, in large part because he seemed to get hit by anvils a lot. And then he'd run off the edge of a cliff. And there was that moment in the cartoon where Wile E. Coyote's legs and arms were spinning and he seemed to be suspended in midair. And one of the fun things as a kid was, I know he's going to fall. And it's going to be bad. And I have that slight feeling about a lot of households who've seen the headlines from the Reserve Bank putting up interest rates and all sorts of noise about inflation. But if they took out a 1 or 2 or 3 year fixed rate mortgage, they haven't actually seen it hit quite yet. But in the next year, that sort of delayed reaction, hands and arms stop spinning, Wile E. Coyote starts to drop, is going to have an impact. How much of a sort of a delayed are we going to see from that increase in mortgage costs?
Yeah, so the Reserve Bank started lifting interest rates in October last year, and we're starting to see the full impact of those rate rises now. People generally take out mortgages over spring and summer because that's when they buy their house. It's the most activity is done over the drier months, and that's when we generally see people fixing. So a lot of people are rolling off. About a third of people are rolling off right now. 50% roll off in the next 6 to 12 months. So that's half of the entire mortgage book of everyone who has a mortgage rolling off really low rates, and I mean really low rates. We had mortgage rates of close to 2% last year. They're rolling off those rates, and they're rolling onto rates that we haven't seen in over a decade. And, that is going to have a big impact on household budgets. And not many people are like us and sit down and look at the markets and interest rates moving and thinking about hedging their risks or, fixing mortgages a bit more aggressively. People just, take the rate and wake up one day and, our mortgage is rolled off. So I think there's a lot of people out there who may not be thinking about interest rates, but they will soon be forced to think about an interest rate when it comes off its previously fixed term.
I can imagine that letter coming through the mailbox, opening it up and seeing this number that says 6 point something, scratching the number with your finger just to check that it's not a typo or something. What is this 6 thing? I haven't seen this before.
Yeah, I mean, take a sort of a normal type mortgage for Auckland. $800,000 I think is roughly what we see throughout Auckland as a size of a mortgage. You would have been paying $20,000 a year in interest last year and over the last year with a low 2% rate. Now you're rolling off and you have to pay probably $60,000, if not a little bit more. So that's a tripling in interest expense. That's an extra $40,000 a household has to find to service their mortgage. That is huge, and it's coming for most people.
So no more flat whites and maybe move to the Colby cheese from the tasty cheese. I'm curious too about wages and the sort of pressures we're seeing in the labour market, ones that I probably didn't expect a couple of years ago when we were coming out of COVID. It seems all around the world something has happened to the supply of labour that we weren't really thinking about. Some people have retired, some people are a little bit sick, some people are having to stay at home to look after kids. There's all of this combination of labour force withdrawal, forced or otherwise, that has changed the balance in that supply-demand thing. We all learned in economics, when there's a change in the supply or demand, you have to have a change in the price to find a new equilibrium. And what are we seeing at the moment in terms of our labour market, and how much of it do you think that's supply shock? Obviously, we've seen the migration drop when the borders were closed during COVID. It's starting to come back now. But how much of the supply shock in our labour market is going to turn into something a bit more permanent and cause employers some grief, but maybe if you're an employee, give you a little bit more power for that fund negotiation every year, or maybe, a sign-on bonus or something like that?
Yeah, I think we all recognise that, particularly between that period of 2014 to 2019, when we had a record migration boom, like the largest migration boom New Zealand's seen in a very, very long time. We recognised that was, increasing the supply of labour, and foreigners would come down here and just accept, whatever price was on offer. So there was no doubt that, large amounts of migration was dampening wage pressure, and we've just proven that because we've gone through a period of a few years, without that migration coming through, and we've seen a significant tightening in our labour market. As you say, the supply of labour has been an issue for the last 3 years, and we've seen price take off. So wages are rising at quite a fast pace compared to history. So wages are rising, and that's on the back of a very tight labour market. On the demand side, obviously demand for labour picked up with the bounce back out of COVID. We saw a bit of a demand shock globally with demand for goods and services spiking. So of course that led to more demand for labour, which was tight. And we're in a position now with a very low unemployment rate, near record low of about 3.3%. And that's generating, wage growth of, anywhere between 5 and 10%, depending on the measures you look at.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that we have 3.3% unemployment, which normally that's seen as a good thing and makes people happy. Nearly 10% growth in household incomes overall, not necessarily wage rate, but household incomes, because there's more people working and they're working sometimes for longer hours. So you got people with jobs and significant income growth, even more than the cost of living at 7%. If you've got 10% extra coming into the house every year and your costs went up 7%, you're actually a little bit ahead. I know not per hour worked, but still, it's not that bad. And sure, if you own a home, your house price has come off, but you're still probably well ahead in nominal terms of where you were at the beginning of COVID. Yet when you look at the consumer confidence and the business confidence figures and what people say they feel about their futures, there's like this complete disconnect, isn't it, between what you think's going to happen to you and how bad you feel and what's actually coming into your bank account each year and how actually wealthy you are. And I'm curious about whether you think something weird is going on in consumer and business psychology because of the dramas of the last 2 or 3 years with COVID and Russia and all of that. Can you give us a sense of whether those relationships between confidence and spending and investing have broken down a bit?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think the discussions that we've had with customers, I think reflect the surveys that we're seeing quite nicely, actually. So when we talk to businesses in particular, the number one concern for most businesses is labour, like we just went through. They can't get the labour that they need. They're having to, open for 4 days as opposed to 7 days a week, and there's all these constraints on businesses, particularly in labour space. And then you ask them what else is going on, and the cost of labour. Their costs are spiking. The costs of materials, the cost of other things that they need to run their business have also spiked. So that's reducing their profitability. And when you talk through these issues with businesses, it's quite clear that they're not looking to the future like we would hope they would at this particular point in time. That they've got their heads down, they're putting out fires, they're doing what they can to survive or adapt to the current situation, but their investment intentions is low, actually contraction. So they are not investing in the future, which worries me from a growth perspective. Economic growth dies very quickly when small to medium businesses get upset and bunker down and not invest. And that's what they're telling us, and that's what's been reflected in the surveys. And I think that will be the turning point for next year. That business confidence or lack of confidence is a real concern. And then, of course, households are in situation we mentioned before with high inflation still eating away. Their incomes might be rising a little bit more than that, but it's still front of mind when you go down and buy your groceries and they're up 10%. That hurts. And of course, their interest expenses going up. Their house prices are going down. There's nothing but bad news. And people like me yelling out there's a recession coming next year, you can understand why confidence has been hit.
Yes, and choosing the avocado on toast instead of the cheese on toast, I think, is one of the weird things about what we're seeing at the moment is the avocados are cheap and the cheese is just not. Just finally, Jarrod, looking ahead, I know we sort of asked this question a year ago, and neither of us, I think, were thinking about what was in the mind of Vladimir Putin. So that was a wild card, one of those black swans that come sailing over occasionally. We can't pick those. But what are the, maybe the grey swans or the ducks, the things that you're watching out there that could move the needle? We don't know which way the needle might go, but what are the things that you think, I'll keep an eye on that one?
It has to be inflation. It just does. I mean, we talk about, Ukraine and the reopening of China and all these, big events. But at the end of the day, it's what inflation is doing that'll drive what central banks are doing, and that'll drive, the economy. We're watching inflation closely, and we've seen it peak in the United States, and I think it's peaking globally. And I think that inflation this time next year will be a lot lower than what it is today. I'm reasonably confident on that. Commodity prices, I think, will come off next year, but, inflation's the big one. And if we're right, and if inflation has peaked, then interest rates will peak in the next 3 to 6 months. And that'll be huge. Central banks will stop tightening, and we'll see interest rates peak and actually start to fall. The next thing that traders and economists and people like us think about is, well, what's the next move? The next move is a rate cut. And I think that's what we'll be talking about this time next year. I think the Reserve Bank may be in a position to start easing, to start cutting interest rates this time next year. And that'll be the theme heading into 2024. And it'll be, how much has inflation fallen by, how much can central banks start cutting, and what does that do to equity markets and housing markets? And I think that's when we'll start talking about, a resurgence in asset prices into 2024.
Good thing I got the tape running. We'll come back in a year's time. Jarrod Kerr, the Chief Economist at Kiwibank. Jarrod, thank you so much for being with us this year on When the Facts Change. I hope you have a wonderfully safe and warm and dry summer, unless you're a farmer on the side. But lovely to have you, and no doubt we'll do this all again in a year's time and at various points in between. Ka kite anō.
All right. Thank you very much, Bernard. It's great being part of these podcasts. I think they're fantastic.
When the Facts Change was brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, together with Kiwibank. Visit kiwibank.co.nz to find out how Kiwibank are making Kiwi better off.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.